Roll up, roll up. See the future stars of rock. Watch 3 live bands, magic tricks, guitar masterclasses. Be entertained by card shufflers, chord shufflers, and note makers. In the awesome surroundings of the Weald of Kent and at the big top of this kingdom, your chance to be entertained or even win a BC Rich guitar. On the 12th of March, starting at 3:30 through to 7:30 at the wonderful Kingdom near Penshurst, we will be doing a fundraising event for Ikaro Music to enable young people to learn to play the guitar and write songs. Be sure to be there. Numbers are limited. Follow the link in the show notes on the Eventbrite. Today I'm talking to Sean Drummond. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much. So traditional first question, what do you do?
It's a very tough question.
I know. And this is amazing because a lot of people have a lot of problems answering this.
I suppose I make films, but I'm a writer sort of first and foremost. So I think I'm a storyteller. I think I enjoy telling stories, but then I think I try and find different ways to do that. That's not just restricted to the idea of being a filmmaker, which seems, when you say it, it seems very kind of like almost like finite and fixed. And I hate to think of anything, in this crazy life as being that rigid and structured.
Yes. It's quite interesting because I have lots of different responses to that opening question, and it's a sort of it's a bit of an opening gambit, really. It's not, because if you're a creative person, it's difficult to categorize what you do anyway. So,
sure,
a little bit of a trick question, but.
I guess it's also how people like define themselves, what they want to put forward first. You learn a lot about a person by going,
oh my God, yes.
What do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, it's just a little bit of a trick question, really. But so storytelling and filmmaking. I mean, when do you, normally these things, at the very beginning, there's something essentially about your character.
Yeah,
sort of early on, maybe that you can sort of go, oh my God, I was doing, when I was whatever.
I think it's always kind of been part of my life. Making, I think because I was a theater kid, so I did a lot of theater as a kid, and I'd always played a bit of music, been in bands, but always I think more as a hobbyist than anything else, and then making films with my brother and with friends when we were kids in school, just finding ways to kind of step outside ourselves. It might be I grew up in a suburb of Cape Town. That's almost the equivalent of a small town within a city, because you got one road in on this side, one road out on that side. And we had to sort of make our we had to make our world, build our world for ourselves,
Yeah.
So we would get together and we would do plays, and we would go up in the attic and we would jam and play music, and we would make films on the weekend. We'd find these ways to sort of build a reality that was bigger than the one that we were in. And I always sort of think of storytelling as being kind of like a wish fulfillment rather than an escape. People talk about it as being escapism, but I don't think it's escapism so much as wish fulfillment, because for me, I'll write sci-fi because I know I'm never going to go to space, but through you're putting myself in the shoes of characters, I can do that. And when I watch Stranger Things or Slow Horses or whatever it is that I'm watching, I'm able to live out a journey that a character goes and that I know in my life I'll never be able to. Everybody watches Breaking Bad because there's a secret part of all of us that just wants to break bad, and we know we never will because we live these safe, like conservative lifestyle. I don't know. So I think part of it's that. I think maybe I'm a little bit of a fantasist, and I like finding excuses to step outside of myself and just go and explore something.
That's interesting you say that about finding excuses for stepping outside, because in actual fact, you're the first person to actually say that, but people talk, their stories actually sort of tell that without them actually saying it. I mean, one of the things that I've found interesting is how people, for instance, got involved in playing certain types of instruments.
Right.
And it was often because they wanted to avoid a particular subject, and it just happened that if they went and learned whatever it was, they wouldn't have to do, whether it was French or whether it was science.
Yeah.
So inadvertently, they're trying to either not do something or fulfill something else, and to do that, they just happen to learn to play, a musical instrument or whatever, or and apparently that seems to be quite typical amongst brass players that I've.
Oh, really?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, they're always trying to avoid something, or it just happened that the actual lessons were at the girls' school, which was another sort of motivator.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah,
I had the opposite. When I was a kid, I played euphonium, which now I've come to appreciate. But at the time, as a 12-year-old, was the least sexy brass instrument, the least sexy instrument in the whole band. And I was like, why am I doing this?
Well, funnily, you're the second person to say that in about the space of 3 weeks.
Really?
Because somebody else learned euphonium and ended up becoming a real sort of top-rate bass player.
There you go.
But again, euphonium was the only one that there was a possibility of playing, because he was particularly interested in saxophone, but there were no saxophones. Right. So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wish I'd just gone for trombone, but now I play the drums, and I actually I think it was kind of when we started playing as 14-year-olds. My parents had an attic in the house, and we all kind of. I think it was that thing of trying to not like find a space to just do something creative and thrive. And so we all sort of picked an instrument at random and just started playing them. We just started having jam sessions are my favorite still to this day. My favorite way to play. We actually had a nice big one at my house last night. So if I'm a little creaky, it's after that. But we couldn't play. We just couldn't play, but that didn't stop us from getting in that attic and just making a noise.
No, you're absolutely
slowly,
right.
over years, evolving together until we were listenable, and then eventually, like, not bad. I think for a teenage like jam band.
Yes, but you see, that's something. Again, that's very old school way of approaching. And I mean, obviously, true for bands like Nirvana and whatever, but also true for the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and all this. Right. Because you could only learn by association with friends, because there wasn't enough information around there. And it sounds actually that your situation where you lived in Cape Town in a suburb was similar to that, because you said it was like a little community.
Yeah.
And you had to do your own thing. And I think that's something which is a little bit, it's sort of sadly missing now, because we've got access to so much information. But you don't really get a chance to really nail those essential bits. Like you're saying, you start off and you're playing and you're rubbish. Everybody's rubbish.
Yeah.
But you enjoy it, and then it develops from there. And I think that's an interesting point. If you're developing sorry.
Yeah, there's almost, sorry, I cut you off, and there's a delay. But there's almost more pressure now because we live so publicly. And the safety net of, I mean, this was the 90s, we were 90s kids, and this was the safety net of knowing you're going to go up there and you're just going to make a horrendous noise, and the only people who are really going to hear it are you, my parents downstairs, the neighbors who like blessed and put up with it for years and years. And now I don't know. Now it's also public, and now we want to put everything we do online anyway. So you've got. I don't want to name specific people, but you've got a whole almost like a whole genre or ecosystem of musicians who put themselves online all the time, or like young musicians whose parents put them online and like, look at my kid who's playing the drums so well, and look how cool my kid is, like da 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 da. I don't know. There's just a weird kind of.
I don't think that's necessarily very good to do that, because it's like you don't get a chance to really just state, if you like.
Exactly.
As an artist. Without suddenly, but you're being influenced all the time, right from early on.
Yeah.
Negatively, because people are criticizing what you're doing. And generally, again, if you think about it, people heard, well, even, me or you in the early days of playing, they go, well, don't bother. But and you don't have that happen. You just get a chance to just enjoy yourself and play.
That's the one. Just enjoy yourself and enjoy. I think the thing, now that I think about it, and I've always said this is true of my film work too, the thing that I really enjoy is the collaboration, because film is such a collaborative medium.
Yes.
There's no film that's a singular vision. As much as people love to spout auteur theory, there's no film that's a singular vision where one person wills it into being. It's an army of it's a small pocket of creatives working at the top of their game, from the director, costume designer, cinematographer, all the actors, the writer, the producer. It has to be a vision that's perfectly in sync, and then they mass an army around it to sort of realize that vision. I think the thing that I love about music is that collaboration too. Because sure, you can play by yourself and write a beautiful song, and people thrive on that. I think for me, what I thrive on is like, I want to hear what you're doing, and I want to find a way to like enhance that or feed off that, or we bounce off each other, and that's what's satisfying for me. Always the collaboration.
I get that. And again, that's a skill in itself, isn't it? Being able to work with people, and also be able to let go of your own ego about, oh no, it's got to be this way, and then realize, well, if you just give somebody the opportunity to work on that thing from their perspective, it will improve what it is that you're doing. And that's the difficult one when you start, because you have a vision and you don't want it to change, but you realize that actually if you give that to somebody else, it'll end up being a lot better.
It's true. That learning to take the criticism, and as a screenwriter especially, you learn, because screenwriting is artistic, of course, it's an art form in itself, but it's a very functional art form, because your job as the screenwriter is to lay down the foundation of what's going to become a film. In an ideal world, the only people who ever read the script are going to be the people who work in the film, and then maybe a couple of people who are interested, who are in the industry. But for your wider audience, the only experience of film they're ever going to get is the film itself. So your script has got to do the job of putting the barest minimum story, character, arc, tone, emotional, foundational beats in there. But really, its job is to inspire everybody else to do a better job of telling the story than you have. Because if what's on the page is the best version of your film, man, you're in trouble. So you have to learn to be collaborative and take the feedback and take the notes of people. And the director's going to have his notes, the actor's going to have their notes, the production designer is going to have notes, and go, well, I don't understand why you've created a space like this. So I don't understand what you're getting at in describing the space in this kind of way. And I've come to enjoy that challenge, but that's also been not beaten into me, but sort of but firmly massaged into me through almost 20 years in the industry now, and just learning how to let go of the precious ego and the creative ego and those ideas you're so precious about. And invariably, you're going to get into shooting. What's nice about writing and then producing a lot of my own work is you sort of see the whole process through. So you put it on the page, and then you realize, and a million things change, because that's production. And then you get into the edit, you get into post, and a million other things change, because you realize, man, that scene doesn't actually work. We've got to reconceive it to do it like this, or you just take it out. And so you sort of reform the film multiple times, and the time that really counts is the last one. And I actually do a lot of story consulting too now on finished films that just aren't working for whatever reason. I'll go and help them try and figure out what's not working and what might make them better. And then we often would just do a re-edit of parts of the film or of the film to try and just enhance or clarify or make sure the audience knows what they're supposed to care about at any one time. So it's quite a fluid, I guess, art form, and you just have to throw the ego away and go, the right idea, the best idea is always got to be the one that wins, whether it comes from you, me, or the guy who's like making coffee. If so be it, you know.
Yeah. I get that. So when you're already doing a lot of stuff as a kid, right? You're making films with your friends, with your brothers, and whatever. When do you actually? Is there a moment when you sort of go? Perhaps there isn't, but I'm just saying. Is there a moment when you sort of go, actually, I'd like to do this, or did you sort of find that certain things happened in a particular way that you found yourself in a situation where you were doing films?
You know, I think it's that. I thought I might be an actor. And for a brief second it went through my mind that I might want to be a musician. But then I got out of school and I actually took a couple of years off and I traveled, and I came to the UK, I came to London. I was working in the Amazon factory. You know, it was real like,
oh my God,
it was that formative London experience. I washed dishes in every kitchen in Surrey. You know, there was definitely a year and a half of real I don't know, gap year on the ground, kind of hands dirty labor. And then I came back to Cape Town. And I started doing a PPE, a politics, philosophy and economics degree. And I guess I'd forgotten how much I wanted to be a filmmaker. I don't know who I thought I was at that point. There was a point where I almost became a game guide, an overland guide too.
Yeah.
And so like you get to this crossroads and all these things. And I started doing the PPE, and I got to be honest, the politics sort of frustrated me. The philosophy, I found university level philosophy first and second year is just a nightmare, man. I just found it so self-indulgent. The people who were there so self-indulgent. I don't want to go as an 18-19-year-old. I don't think I need to go and be in a room and like debate life and existence and everything with a bunch of 18-19-year-olds who actually, we don't know anything about life at that point. And I realized this is kind of futile. And the economics got to a point where I actually just couldn't stay awake through a lecture. And I literally, I'd be there. I have a tell. When my leg goes, I know there's nothing I could do to stop myself.
Your leg starts twitching.
I'm like, okay, and I'd done some film electives, I think, just to make up a credit. And I realized this is the thing I really want to do. And then the opportunity came up to get into, they were starting a new screenwriting course that hadn't existed before. And the opportunity came up to apply for that. And I thought, I'm just going to take the chance. And actually there was one, Leslie Marks, who was the lecturer I had at the time. She was the one who encouraged me to go for it. And I did, and sort of never looked back after that point. Yeah. So it's weird. It was always meant to be, but it also, if not for that sequence of events, I may not have ended up.
Yeah. This is quite a common thing that happens when I talk to people.
Yeah.
Sort of series of events that take you in a direction that, if you look back at it, you think, well, actually, if I'd thought about it, this is where I should be anyway.
Right.
But I was overthinking it instead of going with my.
We're good at that.
Sort of gut feeling. Yeah,
We're definitely good at that.
Exactly. Even when people sort of look around and go, "Ooh, you need a proper job," you realise actually a proper job is probably going to make you so miserable. But so when you started that, then you obviously, once you get into the flow of that, and you're on a college course and you're working, you're working through the course. I'm assuming that the bits start to fall into place, and you think, "Oh, yeah, I enjoy this." Is this? Yeah.
I think so. I think I think there are a few more fortuitous things that I guess I'll say fortuitous for want of a better word, but also just, I think I try and say yes to things, so the opportunity came up to apply and I was like, yes, I'm going to go for it. While I was doing the course, and getting a little bit frustrated that the directing, because I studied at the university in Cape Town, and the students that were doing directing and the students that were doing screenwriting were we existed in completely different worlds.
Yeah.
And you would just assume that writers are getting made by, the opportunities getting made for the scripts to be made by other kids in the space. And that didn't happen. And the director, Michael Matthews, who's the director I mainly work with, we have our company together. He was studying at another film school, and he came to the university because he didn't feel like anybody there was writing on the level that he was looking for. And so he sort of came to our class and said, has anybody got scripts? And I sent a couple of scripts, and there was one he liked, and we ended up doing it as a short film in our second year of university. And that was sort of that. That was great. Oh, somebody's making my work. And the next year we collaborated again on something, and that became a big project. And off the back of that project, we started our company, and there was sort of a whole collective of creators at that point. So he was directing, I was writing, and then we had a cinematographer, a composer, a sound designer, an editor, a production designer, and for the most part, that group are still the guys I work with. Every big project I've done, we've been in those roles on the project. And so again, you don't know what's going to go, but yes, I'll collaborate. Yes, let's see where this goes. Yes, this is working. Yes, there's a synchronicity and a taste, and we respect each other's work. And there's obviously something really solid here. And yeah, and sort of down the line, 15 years pass, and suddenly you realize, oh man, it's so interesting how you never know. And if I'd said no thanks, I'm not going to bother, or I'm going to, I think I even remember where I was. I think I was flying to the US to visit my dad, who was working there at the time, when Mike called me to say, hey, I'd like to make your script. Are you keen? And I was at the airport pretty much waiting to board the flight. Unknown number calls, and I'm like, I guess I've got time to take a call. Hello, this is Mike. I thought I'd do your script. What do you think? Yeah, okay, sure. If I just hadn't taken the call, who knows where life would have taken me now? It's quite possible that every single thing about my life would be different, which is quite a wild thought.
Yeah. I mean, that is, again, as I said, there's a number of little tropes that run through a lot of the podcasts. One of them is this thing of saying yes.
Yeah.
There was, I was reading Keith Livingston's book, the one on improvisation, which is quite formative book, and he does this thing about if you get a group of people together as an improv thing, people acting, and you get them to say yes and as part of the link. It's so much more positive than just going or no or yes but but yes and. So I think that's something that we sort of forget because it seems so trivial, but it isn't. So if somebody throws a problem at you and you say yes and you can flip it around, and again, really a lot of those things like problem solving, particularly I'm assuming, how you manage to solve problems when you're making a film. There must be many. From every possible perspective, and the ones that you don't expect. But you have to have that business, that ability to sort of go yes and. Okay, you take it on board wherever the problem is.
Yeah,
and then you sort of see how you can move forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, on a film set, failure is just not an option because you grind to a halt and you're losing. And some of the things we've had to solve on Five Fingers Marseille, which is my sort of biggest and most well-known project, we had every day was a new nightmare, from weather to budget to injury to a full recasting of one of our main characters halfway through shooting because for medical reasons we had to replace the actor, reshoot the scenes, figure out how to make that happen, figure out for shots that we couldn't reshoot how in post we were going to digitally insert and face replace, and it's just kind of a nightmare. But the thing about yes anding is I think it's such a great life philosophy. If in the world of improv, for sure, it's essential to keep it going firm. But it's a great life thing too, because who wants to be a no person? Who wants to fill their lives with no people?
Yeah, but it's weird because people do that, don't they?
Yeah.
If people criticize things, it's always no.
Yeah.
because they never actually have a solution
to
something.
It's like it's an avoidant way of shutting something down. And then on a film set too, I mean, you just don't say no because you don't have time. If somebody says, I need, if somebody says, I need this whole set turned around so the sun strikes it from the left instead of the right, you just go, okay, that's what we're doing now. And then they get in there like, actually, it was better the other way around. You're sort of like pulling your hair out, but man, you're like, there's no space for no. You just won't get tired again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, your first couple of projects, then when do you get to the thing where it starts to really gather traction? Is it sort of quite early on when you?
I want to say you're doing is yes and no. I think
yes and
no. because we so in our final year of film school and college, we sort of wrote this big Greek mythology inspired serial killer film that we thought we were going to march out into the industry as 22-year-olds and get made, and never mind the fact that it would have been huge and budgetarily sort of way out of our depth, but also I think filmically out of our depth. We just, that like fire of youth where you think you could do anything. We went out to the industry, met a lot of experienced producers, and learned a lot about producing, and sort of had a great lawyer who helped us out and became like one of our big I guess like just like mentors, I suppose. And the project didn't end up going ahead, but for 2 years we worked on it with a couple of producers and just learned a lot. And the end of that sort of relationship ended, we realized this project's too big for us. We're going to have to learn to produce ourselves to make sure we really, we really are able to manage the project the way that we want it to be. And then also going, and it was interesting because there was a lot of excitement because we were a young creative team that had, and we'd done a few cool music videos and some visual projects, and we'd done short films that people liked. So people sort of did look at us and go, "Ooh, these guys are one to watch," but we weren't necessarily like having a ton of success. And it took a couple of years before we sort of did MTV stuff, and we did a bit of like branded content in the early days of branded content and sort of TV documentary stuff, and then saved up enough money to make a really good short film, which was sort of genre, and it was a black and white science fiction riff called Sweetheart, and that did a few festivals, and that got us noticed sort of here and internationally. And then off the back of that, we started pitching Five Fingers, it's a Sotho language, South African modern day Western that sort of draws on everything from like Leone through Unforgiven and like the classic Westerns, and then just has a bit of a modern South African, maybe political allegory in there, and just like really dives into tries to dive deep into a few like, I don't know, things that South Africans are wrestling with these days. And so we started getting momentum now. People started going, okay, this is going to be something really exciting. But again, we just didn't really have that success yet. And then it took 7 years before the film got made, and it came together and fell apart, and came together and fell apart. And we became better filmmakers, but also I think just like more evolved people, because you grow up, a lot. And so we were in our early mid-30s by the time we got to make the film, and ended up being a much better film than it would have been had we sort of like been able to knock it out when we thought we were going to. And interestingly, in the last couple of years, that original project, that Greek mythology thing, has been picked up by one of the same producers and a couple of new producers with a bit more clout and quite a bit more of an international wingspan. And so I think it's back in development, and we may actually end up getting it made. And by now, I think we'd be able to make the film that we sort of envisioned the first time around, that there's no way we would have actually been able to deliver.
No, this is interesting, because again, it's one of those things that often, if you're quite visionary, you're seeing things that are actually not possible at that point in time.
If only you knew it at the time.
Yeah, well, you don't, do you? Because it's all inside your head. I mean, musically, it's the same thing, as you know.
Yeah.
You can have ideas for things that don't have really any traction outside of your own being, but and I think this is one of the things that we forget with people that we think are very futuristic and all the rest of it, like a David Bowie or again the Beatles or whatever. But the point is that they were always on the curve. They weren't so far ahead of it. So there's lots of great musicians and stuff are too far ahead, and nobody ever knows who they are.
Right. Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean anything to people, and it's got to be the same with filmmaking and stuff. It's got to have something that people can associate with.
Yeah.
That pushes their boundaries a bit, but not too much.
Yeah. I think so. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. You often you also reach back to the past and things you're influenced by and inspired by. I'd say inspired by rather than influenced by, and that's familiar to audiences too. I think the danger is that we also live in a very referential time, and so there's a lot of mimicry and not so much in it. I think actually maybe in any creative industry the baseline is mimicry. And then, like you say, there's a band of innovation, and then there's probably a band of just like beyond the scope of whatever. But and that innovation is probably where you want to be, where people are going. This feels familiar, but it's also exciting, and I don't know where it's going.
Basically, you've got to be speaking their language.
Yeah,
because it always comes down to that at the end of the day. It's got to be. I can't remember when I read this. It was years ago, and people were talking about. I think it's somebody in. Yes, I know where it came from now. There was a book by a guy called Jerry Coker who used to write things about jazz, and he came out with this idea that I think some professor at Berkeley had come out with, that you've got this sort of 80-20 perspective thing, that you've got to have like the mainstay as being what people expect. But no more than that, like 80% maybe of that. I didn't use 80% actually, come to think about it, but it was this idea that there was a percentage of it had to be understandable. But then you had to have this other area that was unexpected.
Okay.
And if you didn't have that, the music would just be boring. If there was too much of that, then the music was just not accessible.
Sure, yeah.
And that would explain why people who are musicians or artists or whatever would be listening and being influenced by things that were further out than the majority of people would listen to, because they already had more stuff in the tank. And that sort of makes sense. And again, that's a difficult thing when you're creating and you're then trying to sell it to an audience.
Yeah.
That you've got to have what's in their tank as your perspective, because it's not going to be the same as what you have as your experience.
Yeah, it's also the thing about film is that it's so expensive too. So you're almost always putting a lot of money at stake in service of creating an artistic output, but it's also for an audience, because film without an audience. Look, I'm not saying film without an audience there's plenty of art film that exists for the sake of art, but for the most part, you're making film because you want people to watch it. Yeah. And so you it's exactly that. You don't want to give them something that's just so baffling to them that they're going, we don't like it. It's funny how many films do sort of find appreciation years later, but
well, that's a good example of what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
That years later, people have moved on.
Yeah,
the general public have moved on, and then they can appreciate a film that was at the time was like baffling to people.
Yeah.
It's
funny.
That is funny. I think you said something that I was going to sort of comment on. Anyway, I'll have to come back to it because it slipped my mind as you were talking. Okay. But I think it's one of those things that's. Oh yes, I'll tell you what it was. When I teach people to songwrite, I say to them, if you're doing it for yourself, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
You can do whatever you want. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the structure is. It's fine.
Yeah.
And that's great because that's for its own sake. Then, of course, if you expect that to be liked by other people, then we have to think about structure and all the rest of it. So again, this is like what you're saying, film for the art's sake. You can do whatever you want, can't you? It doesn't matter. But of course, if you're doing it for an audience, it's got to be packaged in such a way,
yeah,
and presented in such a way that people understand enough of the narrative, enough of the visionary aspect of it, enough of the structure, so you've got, you know, an arc or whatever it is.
Yeah, and people are so literate these days too that people have expectations, and they will very quickly pick up if you're just falling short in any kind of way.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because you mentioned about Greek mythology, right? About your original film.
Yeah.
Because I've always, you know, I've been interested in myth as being this sort of, how that is the thing that can tell you, you know, myth itself is not true, but it tells you truths.
Yeah.
You know, and I think really with film, that must, in a way, be closer to that experience of the storyteller at the campfire in the past, where as he tells the story, because everything else is black apart from the campfire, you know, and everything, there's shadows all around. The visionary aspect of that for the listener is probably very close to a film. You know, if you see what I'm getting at, you know, within their own being, because it's like you've detached yourself from reality for that moment. You're in a different space. You're in darkness. And again, it's interesting that films, if you go to a cinema, you are effectively in darkness until
fully.
You know, the campfire, if you like, of the, you know, the pictures appear.
It's an interesting analogy. I like that. It's interesting, that thing about the power of words and how it evokes, you know, you can read something or hear somebody talking, it evokes a version of it that exists only in your own mind. And some people not criticize film, but, you know, rightfully, film is a very literal translation of that somebody and the creative team have put together. But I think the evolution of that is a power to evoke a different response that, you know, like a response even beyond, you know, which is an emotional response or philosophical response, or the mythic response, like you're saying, where people are going, I understand what this is saying about the world that we live in. And those are the kind of stories that I like, because I think there's a consumable entertainment for entertainment's sake, and then there's like high art for high art's sake, and there's space for both those. And I think I quite like to live somewhere in the middle, where the artistic intent is like very much there, and I'm not big on statement films, but I like poking people to ask questions.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
You know, I want people to question the world.
Same thing with music. Totally.
So giving people.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, giving people that entertainment experience, so they come out of going, oh, fuck that was great. But also going, and if they want to engage on that level, but also going, but what's interesting about this is how it made me think about da. And I think there's a lot of good films, especially now, it feels like there's a lot of good films doing it around class. You know, like Parasite was a good one from a couple of years ago. A couple of months I watched Triangle of Sadness. I watched The Menu this past weekend. They're very, very, all very entertaining, like very beautiful.
I saw there was a remake of Kiyosaki's film called, I think it's called Living. And it was set in London after the war. Had Bill Nighy, and because the story is very similar to the original Japanese, and of course it's incredibly repressed. You know, it's sort of like, because it's set in the British civil service, but incredibly repressed people having this sort of deference to the people who are their elders. You know, obviously that's a direct comparison to the Japanese thing, and gradually it starts to unwind. And this person changes because, you know, he's only got a amount of time left to live. And he starts to do incredible things in a short period of time, but on a very, very small scale. It's not grandiose, but it's to do with just, you know, getting a children's playground set up. And again, you come back from that and you can get that original thing of that, the surface area of that story, the film. But of course, you keep getting sort of nudged by this feeling about, but there was this. that sort of feeling of it bubbling up from underneath. And I think this is what you're saying when you see films like that.
Yeah.
They've got very deep points.
A deep well. I like your bubbling up, because I think that there's a deep well within those, a reservoir of meaning that you can tap if you want to, but you don't have to. So interestingly,
exactly.
Living was directed by Oliver Hermanus, who's a South African filmmaker. Right. Yeah, he's doing amazing things.
Right. Yeah. It's a brilliant film. Absolutely brilliant.
I haven't seen it yet, but I want to. Yeah.
No, it's definitely worth cool. So, 5 Fingers for Marseille.
Yeah.
Because I've seen some bits out. It's amazing looking.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Amazing looking film.
It was a real labor of love.
Yeah, I bet.
Everywhere.
But it's incredible. I mean, I saw the sort of trailers for it, and it's incredibly powerful.
Thank you.
So what was the genesis of that? And
so Michael and I, we were at this point we're just trying to figure out what our first feature film is going to be, and I directed a few feature docus before, and we'd done short films, music videos. He was doing commercials, and I was sort of writing freelance. So we just needed, you're a filmmaker, we just needed to make a film, and we'd really been pushing, and we were actually just traveling around South Africa and road tripping with my sister and a few friends, and we started passing these small towns that were sort of European names, European enclaves, and as is the colonial story of Africa and South Africa, that had townships attached to them, and like since the end of apartheid and the birth of democracy in South Africa, the change, a lot of those old towns are sort of dying out, and a lot of them are being reborn anew, and a lot of those townships are going fully fledged towns in their own rights, and some of them are success stories, like Lady Grey, where we ended up filming 5 Fingers. I'd say is one of the best success stories I've seen, where it's an integrated community, multilingual, that sort of is quite cohesive in its way. Obviously it has problems because it's small town South Africa, and then a lot of them are just sort of disaster stories, I think, where there's sort of poverty and even like climate things, where towns are sort of in very inhospitable areas, because a lot of the country is desert, and a lot of the country is quite extreme weather, and so and then unemployment and all sorts of things that sort of affect the country, and also just being quite a political shit show, to be honest, which I don't think anybody would deny. And so I think in the film we found an excuse to explore this idea of, we wanted to explore Western themes that were also sort of true to South Africa themes. And for me, I love Western. So for me, the sort of pillars of the Western storytelling is, there's the storytelling mantra of all story is conflict in film. And I think beauty of Western is a lot of the time that conflict is so pure. And so the storytelling is so pure. And it's the 4 tenets, I suppose, are man against man, the good guy, the bad guy, the white hat, black hat. Man against himself, especially with the revisionist kind of Westerns, where people, you're unforgiven, you're man, you're going to be sort of fighting with his darkest impulses and violent nature. Man against the land, and of course I say man as the universal, man against the land, where it's trying to tame the land, trying to own the land, trying to fight the land, relate to the land, for a lot of the films have sort of a spiritual kind of layer to them, and then man against the passage of time, the forces of history, and how society changes. And so each of those things is true to the West, and each of those things I think hopefully is true to 5 Fingers. And we just wanted to look at these spaces, the communities that have been displaced in the beginning. There's so much dialogue about land and the contest around land. And actually, when we started working on the film, that dialogue wasn't as profound. It's sort of interesting that it was something that we wanted to explore, and it sort of has become, by the time the film came out, it was a very big part of the social discourse. We got a lot of questions about it going, wow, and we were like, we didn't intend that as a political statement for the sake of a political statement, but it's something we really wanted to explore. And then also just the cycles of violence, and so and an element of lawlessness and police corruption, political corruption, but also how there's corruption can be quite a blunt instrument. The idea of corruption, the government's so corrupt. And I think we wanted to explore also how time, violence, we enact a lot of the violence that's done to us, and how those who idealistically fought for the freedom of this town could become corrupted by sort of by their own natures, sort of by the force of time, sort of by various hardships, and end up becoming part of the problem in this town, ending up needing to be freed a second time round. And of course, the guy who's going to do that is the sort of outlaw who set the town alight the first time and ran, and has come back now seeking his sort of redemption, and all these very classic Western conventions that then hopefully also speak to modern South Africa. So the benefit of it taking 7 years to get made was we rewrote the script a million times, just trying
I
to
can imagine
both those things.
I can imagine it's bad enough to write the book. You rewrite the thing. I know.
And the response has been really good. I think it's been really good from South Africans. It's a film that hopefully is really entertaining. You don't have to tap that well, but if you tap that well, I think it's one that provokes a lot of questions. And it's been really nice to be in an audience where people are just vocal. I mean, it's an interesting thing, because there are a few points in the film, because this was unexpected, but people watch the film and are viscerally like into it with oohs and ahs and screams and clapping, which is honestly the most satisfying thing for a filmmaker you can imagine. And took us totally by surprise. So being in that, but then also afterwards being in Q&As where people's questions just really good, and it's a lot about like what the characters represent and what the story is really about, and what's, like what are the politics, and to which I sort of go, like I've said my bit, the film says its bit. You answer your questions for yourself.
Yes. I think that's an interesting point, that, isn't it? This thing about people. I remember there was an interview with Ken Russell about, it wasn't about Tommy, it was about something else.
Yeah.
But somebody asked him, so and so, within this film, obviously means so and such and such. He went, no.
Just like that.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Is it? But if you think that, that's fine.
Yeah. I love that.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because we've got this idea that people analyse something and they think they've got the answer, but in actual fact, there might not have been. That might not be the point anyway.
Yeah.
And we always project our stuff to the world anyway, don't we? So when we watch a film, we project our own things on the characters, and as you say, it's interesting being in a Q&A when people might ask questions like that, when you think, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite though. We would get Q&A because our main villain is this character, the ghost, who's almost like an ethereal kind of being who's touched by tragedy and I think in his own mind believes he lives in a realm beyond mortal men. Maybe he does, and it's so interesting because that character evokes different responses from people, to the point where people have asked, is he really there, or is he like a collective hallucination? Is he a manifestation of the guilty conscience of the characters? Is he the ghost of colonialism? And I'm like, yes. Sure, to all of these things, yes, absolutely. Why not? Because that's amazing, and that's the question's like so far beyond.
That is such a brilliant thing, and maybe it's a question that I could imagine being asked in a place maybe like South Africa that might not be asked here.
Yeah, maybe.
And it's also a question that might be asked in Ireland, but not here. Because I think some cultures still have. They're in touch with this other world aspect. They might not believe that, but they still have that thing that they're not really sure. Well, hence their vets, and it's in the way that their culture.
Yeah. But I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about the meaning and people wanting the meaning. It's this interesting thing we live in now with there's all these explainer videos, and anytime anything comes out, YouTube's full of the end of X-Files explained. And I find myself getting in a bad pattern sometimes now when I watch something and I go, oh, I think I understand what that was about. I wonder if I'm right. And I'll go watch a couple of videos, and then I sort of catch myself and I'm like, no, it doesn't matter what some guy on the internet thinks.
There's that sort of thing of because when I was talking to Bruno, the reason I met Bruno is because we did the sort of NLP stuff together, and master practitioner stuff in London.
Right.
And of course, you realise that you were talking about the power of words and how a word generates a picture, and it has a meaning to you, which could be different from the meaning to somebody else. But now we've got to this point where everything seems to be sort of delineated, but it's not actually that people realise that. It's like a sort of a creep thing that happens within sort of education generally, that there's a right answer here. If you do this, you're going to get a better marking exam because it's sort of the correct answer. Well, it's like, well, there isn't a correct answer. I mean, as you get older and older, you realise, oh my God, nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
You think you have all the answers when you're like you're saying, when you're 20, because you're out there and you're going to do the thing and change the world. And as you get older, you realise actually all those, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
It's all back to front and inside out, which again brings me back to that thing about the type of questions that could be asked within a culture like say maybe South Africa. I mean, that they could see that there was a potential for that character not to be there, or it's like he was otherworldly.
Yeah.
Whereas in we might think of it as some computer projection, as in the Matrix. We try to make it rational in an irrational way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I am interested in that, in the way that cultures will see different things.
Yeah, for sure. I think the interesting thing about storytelling is that the universal themes or tropes or conventions are the things that sort of allow audiences to access something that they don't quite understand. Yeah. But then I find you really want to be specific about specific things, about where it's at, what the culture is, and for us, doing with the local cast, doing it in Sesotho, doing it in the space, because then it makes it way more interesting. There's nothing worse to me than generic for the sake of genericness.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And especially in the film industry, people try and make things as accessible and generic as possible, putting in the familiar face. And actually, because we had American co-producers on the film, and most of the money ended up coming out of the States. And when we decided to work with them, Asgen, you're on, they just asked the hardest questions. And in terms of, can you pull this off? And we were like, well, we think so. And then can we do it in English instead of local language? Because it'll open up a market. And then can we put an American star in it? Because it'll open up an American market. And we said absolutely not to both those things, because we're gonna kill the authenticity and the artistic intent of what we're trying to do. And they said, well, then we have to think about whether we want to get involved in this film. And then they went away and thought about it, and they came back and said, we understand, we get it, we're fully on board. And then they, ironically, 5 years later, when we were freaking out about the film having fallen apart for the third time, and we were like, maybe we should just put an American star in it, maybe we should do it in English, they were the ones going, no, you convinced us in the vision the first time around, and we're not going to let you ruin your own film. No. So,
there's a little story I can tell you from somebody who's a storyteller who actually who tells Norse sagas.
Okay.
And again, this goes back to just being in a wood with a group of people, and he's sitting there and he's telling the story of and in this he's talking about these gods gather by the oak tree, and he points to the oak tree that's next to where he's sitting, and then later on he's talking about something, and somebody's countenance being so beautiful, it looked just like those oxeye daisies over there. Yeah. That was how white their skin was. So the point was he took that story, which is an ancient story, and rooted it where we were. And the effect is very subtle, but it was really profound, because you were now in the story. You were in the place that, Thor was meeting whoever,
Right.
This is the tree. Yeah. And I think that, what you're saying about having the language that you did the filming, and the fact that it was people that you knew that they came from the place, makes a massive difference. And it may be just unconscious, but the point is, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean,
you know.
Yeah,
and I think that's actually a really brave move for everybody, even the Americans, from that point of view, that they went with that and they got it.
Yeah, they were great. I mean, we would never have been able to make a film without them, and everybody was really happy. Like, everybody bought into it. The film didn't really make as much money as we hoped it would, and it did travel, and it had a very small theatrical release in the States and in parts of Europe and in Asia, South Korea and Japan. I think it came out on Amazon Prime in the UK originally, so it didn't get theatrical there. A couple of private screenings, I think, but it just went straight to streaming. And did okay over there.
That's quite a good thing though now for film, isn't it? For streaming.
Yeah. It's the norm now. I think we were just ahead of that curve of being the norm. It was starting to become that way. Now, a lot of the time, international films like this will mostly release on streaming and occasionally get a little theatrical release if it's warranted. But a lot of the time people now will just do a global sale to Netflix. And the problem with that for me is, I think we were just ahead of the curve. So as these young filmmakers, first-time filmmakers, we got to do the festival trail. The film premiered at Toronto, and then we came to London for BFI. We did a lot of really good festivals, and then we got to go through the traditional of a release, and then meeting agents and getting signed, and just as like entry into the industry. And now I think there's a danger with the streaming services, because the film will just go straight to streaming, and it gets its top banner in whatever territories it's going to get. So now a lot of South African films will go straight to Netflix. They'll get promoted in South Africa. They'll get their top 10 for the first 2 weeks. And then occasionally people in the rest of the world will watch them. And then they sort of just disappear into the endless scroll of scroll, which for me, I think is a problem. I think a lot of fresh film voices may get lost that way by never getting the platform that doing it sort of traditionally, for want of a better word, affords. So we were lucky enough to just be on kind of the tail end of that. So the film didn't make much money, but everybody involved, including the investors, and we had one investor who sort of paid for half of the film, and who's used the film to launch his own successful producing career. Everybody loved the film. Everybody got to come out and be part of the festival experience. They got to come to South Africa and watch it with local audiences, which, like I was saying, is just a wild kind of experience. I think everybody was really happy, and we always knew it probably wasn't going to blow the bank open, but what we hoped more than anything was that it would be an artistic statement of who we are as storytellers, and I think it sort of did that job quite nicely. So So what are you working on now? That's a terrible thing to ask you. You've probably got 10 different things going on, and I've scaled down quite a bit since COVID for personal reasons, and I took quite a lot of time out during COVID for personal reasons, and so I'm finding my way back to work now. Wrote a couple of episodes of a series, a Netflix series that I think is coming out in the next few months. I'm actually getting to see it tomorrow for the first time. It's quite exciting. Okay. I hear good things, so if it's good. It's called Unseen, so I'll just drop that as it's a South African show that I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say about it, but it's about a woman whose husband disappears, and she sort of goes out into the underbelly of Cape Town looking for him, and shenanigans ensue. And I'm doing a lot of story consulting, actually, so a lot of edit consulting, like I was saying, and then sort of getting involved in things anywhere from concept through scripts, just to help people refine their creative visions and try and bring the best out of what they're trying to achieve. And I really enjoy that.
That sounds like really good fun, actually. Interesting, sort of.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And like I said, I love the collaboration. And then have a series, quite a deep, dark series. It's also a little bit of a supernatural, a little bit of a crime thriller, also a small town South Africa. It seems to be a happy place for me. It's a bit more of a crime procedural with an is there or isn't there something supernatural going on that I'm working on now. We're about to start scripting the pilot, and a couple other things here and there. But it's nice to be busy, but I'm trying to be busy on my own terms now. The interesting thing, I was chatting to a friend of mine this weekend about our creative identity, and I think it's so easy. As a filmmaker, it's so all-consuming that it can become your whole thing. And you're young, in your 20s, you want to become a filmmaker, you want people to recognize your art. And there was a time where it really became my whole life, and my friends were filmmakers, and I was dating film people. And Five Fingers was all-consuming to the point that I was turning down opportunities to do anything else for the slight possibility that it could go ahead. Like I turned down the chance to do a stage play, even though I hadn't done one in 10 years, and I would have loved to do it. And I was like, I think we might shoot the film this year. Of course, we didn't shoot it for another 4 years, and the film fell apart for, I think it was maybe the second time. And I took a deep breath, and I sort of said, this is going to destroy me, because I've invested so much of myself in this thing, and every time it collapses, I feel like I'm losing myself. So I bought a new set of drums, and I started playing music again, found a great group of collaborators, started finding this new creative satisfaction that comes out of just being in a room jamming, like we were talking about, and sort of really expanded my life in a way that I think is just so healthy. I think if we get so tied to our creative identities to the point that we lose ourselves, there's kind of a danger in that. And I also just realized I don't ever want to be someone who takes myself that seriously as a filmmaker, that I've invested my whole self in it, because man, there are a lot of them in the industry. There's, same with music, I guess. It's creative industry is a minefield of ego and
don't believe your own publicity.
Exactly. Yeah. What a world.
Brilliant stuff. Well, thanks, Sean. That was wicked.
Thanks, Vic.
Really interesting stuff. Cool. And obviously, I wish you all the best for what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I'll pop up some things on the show notes, so afterwards.
Cool. Yeah.
Maybe you can just send me some links and things.
Sure.
I mean, you're welcome to read things out now, but whenever I listen to podcasts, I can never write things down. So
I mean, I think Five Fingers is available now on most platforms. I think it's sort of pay-per-view on Amazon, iTunes, and a few other platforms in the UK and worldwide. And keep an eye out for Unseen. And it's very strange actually, because I did a solo show about a week ago called "Seeing What Is Unseen." Okay.
Which is about techniques of spotting things where you look at stuff and you just can't see the answer, and then you go away and come back and there it is staring you in the face. So it's funny you should say that.
Synchronicity.
Well, I know. I'm well into that. Good stuff. Anyway, cool. that's wonderful. So hopefully speak again at some point.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much.
Man. Cheers.
Bye.